Welcome to Joffy Noodle Legs and the Horror House.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a different sort of top five today. Today I'm looking at what I think are the best five countries of making horror movies. So it's taken me a little while to sort of come up with five countries that I think make the best horror films, because so many um, countries make some incredible horror films. But to get in my top five, you have to have um, storylines that are not predictable, that are different, that not afraid to sort of go to not necessarily extremes, but just uh, have the courage to be um, what's the word I'm looking for? Hello, mate. You sit up there. That's my pet monster there. You just got to sort of not be afraid to kind of um, be adventurous and have ideas, and not follow everyone else, and go with what's necessarily the most sort of popular sort of genre or something like that. So I'm going to go through my five favourite countries. So number five is going to be um, France. French horror it's a great um, genre. It's a very powerful genre, mostly because like Italian, their language is very passionate, and the way they pronounce things can come across as real intense. And they make quite a few extreme horror films. The French, I mean, obviously since like the 90s upwards, we've had quite a few extreme French horror films, but you can go way back to the early sort of films like the Eyes Without a Face, or you can go to the more modern ones like Martyrs or High Tension, or I believe that was called Switchblade Romance when we first got it here, and sort of films like that were quite extreme, and they didn't hold back in the storylines, but they were all sort of really unique and different, and they were really cool. I just love that sort of French horror was not afraid to go beyond the boundaries, and sort of bring a more disturbing kind of film forward, and that's why I love French horror. Unfortunately, that they probably make loads, but we don't get too many here. But the ones that we do get, I love. And Second Sight went through a stage of sort of pushing out quite a few of these sort of French extreme sort of films, which I really loved. Which I think my favourite out of those would probably be oh, what's it called now? This is where I'm useless. I can't remember the name, but I really enjoyed Frontiers. I thought that was really cool. But I have to say, Martyrs is probably my favourite French horror film. I think it was just such a cool storyline and quite shocking for its time. Really cool. So number five is France. So number four, I'm gonna go with one of their neighbours in Spain. Spanish horror films. Now, I got into Spanish horror films way back when I first saw the Blind Dead films. I absolutely loved those zombie films. I thought the zombies in those were unique and absolutely fantastic. They were really, really cool and different to a lot of they looked like proper zombies. They had skeleton faces and they had the skeleton hands and stuff. So I loved the Blind Dead films, all of them. Although most of them did repeat a lot of footage, but that adds to the charm of the film. Really cool. And of course, they brought out films that I love, like Pieces, which I absolutely adore. I love that. And in the more modern times, we had films like Wreck, which was another fantastic Spanish horror film. And obviously, recently, last year, we had The Coffee Table, which is another Spanish horror film. And they're all so different. They're all uniquely special in their own ways. And okay, a lot of the early films are very similar to the Italian sort of films, but then again, they're neighbouring countries, so they're going to pick off each other's tastes and stuff like that. But they were still all unique with their own sort of feel to them, and it was just absolutely fantastic. The Spanish horror films, and you had some uh, uh, the Del Toro films like The Orphanage, which was fantastic. What an amazing film that is as well. So I really enjoyed that film. It was so sort of bleak but beautiful at the same time. So my third favourite country for horror films is Spain. No, that's my fourth, sorry. See what I mean? Silly old man. My third, we're going to go a long, long way. We're going to go to Japan and Japanese horror, or if you want to class it, J horror. Yes, this became more popular mostly in the 90s and early 2000s, and it seemed to filter off in popularity. But although they still, they still produce high quality horror films, we just don't get many over here. But the ones I have seen, I've really enjoyed. But again, my love began with films like Grudge, or was it Ju-On, whatever it was called, fantastic, and Shutter. I loved Shutter. One Missed Call was another great film from the Japanese sort of thing. Yes, everyone knows The Ring, and the Ring films are really cool. Um, but I really loved and Pulse. Pulse was another really good Japanese film. And the thing is, it's like they spawned loads of remakes because these films are so good that the American market wanted these for the American market. And um, I know that at the time, I'm not sure what it's like now, but a lot of the American film watching public didn't particularly like films in a foreign language or with subtitles. Maybe because it takes you away because you've got to read text down the bottom. It can take you away what's going on. I can understand that, but um, it didn't never bother me, and I quite liked it. And some of the remakes lost the heart of the original, and the originals were so cool and really awesome. And I think as they come from Japanese folklore, a lot of these films like yokai and stuff like this, um, to recreate that in another country just doesn't sort of work. Um, I just think no. I know what they tried to do. They made them in Japan with American characters and stuff like that, but it was just lost something. And Japanese cinema also, going back to the yokai, brought us some of the best monster flicks with Gamera, Godzilla, some amazing monster creature features which are phenomenal. So they're absolutely amazing sort of country for horror films. And of course they've made their extreme films. We've got quite a few extreme horror films from them, like Audition and things like that go a little bit further than the Grudge, but these Grudge, Ring, Dark Water are all ghost stories. Ghost stories are so popular. They've always been popular in Japan. If you look back, they've made some really early ghost samurai sort of films. The Snow Woman, things like that, which are amazing films, which I have reviewed on my channel. Definitely worth checking out Japanese horror. I think there's more into it than The Grudge and The Ring. That's all I'm saying. If you look further, there is some incredible films in Japanese horror. And you got like your monster films, you got your ghost stories, you got your samurai ghost stories, and stuff like that. And it's really cool, really good genre. So my third favorite country for horror films is Japan. So now we're down to the big two. Number two, sorry guys, it's British horror. It just slipped off the top slightly. And it's only because I don't think we make enough of them. But we are only a small island, but we don't make enough of them. But what we do make is absolute class. We go back before the sort of Hammer films. We had some early sort of really good horror films. But then Hammer came along and sort of like really pushed British horror to the forefront with its sort of gothic style of filmmaking, with Dracula and The Curse of Frankenstein and uh, Frankenstein Created Woman and um, all these wonderful, wonderful films, that we made. The Gorgon, the Reptile. I can go on with all of Hammer's films. They were absolutely incredible. And in the 70s, the British horror, well, Hammer seemed to have sort of made its peak and started to peak down. I'm not sure if they're running out of ideas, but they did try to include some of their old favourites. Like we had Frankenstein, the Monster from Hell. We had Dracula, 1972 AD. So they did try to bring that forth, but people have seen that and wanted something new. So they went to do things like To the Devil Daughter, and all these wonderful films still, but it just sort of didn't connect. But I think because we had other companies like Amicus that were making these anthologies, which people quite like because they were short burst stories, and we had directors like Peter Walker coming up with his more exploitational sort of horror in the 70s, which I'm not saying was a result what was going on in America with obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre and their exploitation films like Drink Your Blood and all that. But I think it was more that he tried to bring it more to a more modern audience because he probably realized that these films were popular, and he brought some of those sort of films to the forefront. And then again in the 90s onwards, British horror has been amazing. We've had 28 Days Later series going forward. We've had things like The Descent and all these incredible films. And um, one of my favourite films, Creep, as you know, because it's got Sean Harris in it. Absolutely fantastic. And of course, The Ritual. And we're still making some amazing horror films now. Um, Out of Darkness from last year was fantastic. It was one of my favourite films of the year. Absolutely amazing film. And we are still producing now. I think some of the best horror films made are coming out of Britain right now, and I think that it's really cool that we are, personally, in my opinion, at the forefront of now modern horror, which is fantastic. So my second favourite country for horror films is the UK. So there can only leave one country at number one, right? So my favourite country for horror films is Italy, of course. I think Italian horror is just a genre on its own. It's just fantastic. Although it's got its own little subgenres with your giallo and your cannibal films and all these wonderful sort of films that they made. But they also made sensual horror films that we know, ghost stories, the macabre stories, zombie films, vampire films. They've touched on all that, but they've had their own little subgenres. The giallo is an Italian subgenre. The cannibal film really is a subgenre, although there is some British cannibal films. Don't forget that. We've got Deathline, and we have the amazing Frightmare. Um, Fantastic. But yeah, I think that the Italian films just were full of passion, full of heart. They might not have been the best acted films. I'm talking mostly of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. They might not be the best acted films, but that's also part of the film's charm, is the fact that let's not worry about that. Let's not worry about the actor's skills. Let's worry about the story and what we're portraying over and what we're showing our viewers. Um, and let's integrate mystery into our films. And a lot of them have so much mystery and backstory to it. If you look at Lucio Fucci's trilogy, The Beyond, House by the Cemetery, City of the Living Dead, they were all like got this backstory of the Book of Enoch, right? So they've all got a backstory, and they all seem to connect. And I thought, what an imaginative idea. Although the films were different in so many ways, they were similar in so many ways. And it brought it together like a trilogy of films. And they just so creative. And they had the master of horror films, Dario Argento, who brought out the best horror films and best giallo films I've ever seen. From Tenebrae down to Opera, down to Suspiria, all these incredible films. His version of Dracula was pretty good. I quite enjoyed that. There's one he brought out in 2019. I've not seen it yet. I still want to see that film. I can't even remember what it's called. But he also brought out a number of incredible giallo films. Your Deep Red and your The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and all these wonderful films. And he also brought out sort of American friendly films like Phenomenon, which had Donald Pleasance and Jessica Connelly in it, which would open it out to like a wider audience. And he also helped other filmmakers make incredible films. Umberto Bava's Demons was produced by Dario Argento, and he's done lots of things like that. And his back catalogue, I cannot think of a bad film. When I think of his films, I can't think of a bad film. Absolutely fantastic. They got the masters of cinema in filmmaking in Italy. Dario Argento, Lucio Fucci, Mario Bava, Umberto Bava, Umberto Lenzi, all these incredible directors have made some of the best and most extreme films that we've ever seen. A lot of them, most of them ended up on the Video Nasty list, from Cannibal Holocaust through to Slave of the Cannibal God, or through to the extreme zombie flesh eaters, and all these films made, like even Tenebrae was on the section 1 of Video Nasties. And then we had some really kind of strange films from them, which I ended up loving, like Baron Blood. What an incredible film. Really, really cool. And I just love these sort of Italian giallo films. And there's so many of them that are so cool. The Case of the Bloody Iris, to name but one. Absolutely cool. They were making these incredible films while back in England we were making the folk horror films with our Wicker Man and Blood and Satan's Claw, which were fantastic. So both of these countries, it was so difficult to choose the best, were being so creative when other countries were being repetitive. And I like these two countries the best. I'm not saying Britain because I'm British, but just because of the creativity and that adventure to be able to be different. I mean, when you see Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, you think, wow, what an imaginative way to do this film. Although it was perverse and stuff like that, but it was such a different take on the Frankenstein sort of story that it made it really cool. I mean, it's just so cool. Yes, we've had some shocking films from these films. I mean, Sarlo is a film that's difficult to watch, but these were more art house rather than more than horror. But wow, I mean, absolutely fantastic. So Italy is my number one country for horror films. So, but let's address The Dog in the Room. America was not in my top 5. And it's not because they don't make good films. They make amazing films. When you go right back to the early films, I think my love for American horror is way back really with the more vintage horror. But of course, then we had the splurge of the gothic horror, or that was kind of matching with Hammer when we had the Vincent Price films. And then we had the exploitation cinema coming through, you know, with Blood Feast and I Drink Your Blood, right through to I Spit on Your Grave and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So the 70s were the American sort of exploitation. And then slasher came along, which I loved. The problem I have with the slasher genre is it's made everything in American horror quite samey. So if you watch American slasher film, they are very samey. They got a master killer or a killer like that, you know, and it's just like, or you've got a Scooby Doo sort of film, a bit like Scream, and they feel the need to explain to you who did it at the end, which is something I really detest in the film. But I think the problem with American horror, and it's not a put down, because like I said, I love American horror films. Most of my top 10 films will be American, but it's because of the quantity rather than the quality. So if something's popular, something takes off in America and becomes popular, they will just exploit it and just do loads of films replicating that. You know, like for an example, like we in the sort of 90s, early 2000s, they went through the stage of making remakes. It started with the remakes of the Japanese films, which I can understand. Like I said, if the American audience didn't really appreciate the original foreign language thing, which, okay, fair enough. But then they went on to remake some other films that they didn't need to remake. Psycho, for one, it was a pointless remake, didn't need it. Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, didn't need it. House of Wax, didn't need it. You know, all these sort of remakes that they then started to do were stuff that we didn't really need doing, because it didn't change or bring anything new to that original story. So a remake or a reboot. Now, a remake, I think, is to try and encourage a new audience to a certain story. But why not just push out that original film? Like, now we've got the quality and the ability to remaster these old films to 4K and to make them look incredible. Why not just bring out the old film, you know, and that's it. You know, I think that's the issue that I had with American horror, is that it became very samey and it's trendy. So a certain trend would kick off, and then all films will follow suit. If you know what I mean. Like I said, when Scream got popular, so we had a boot of I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legends, Valentine, My Bloody Valentine remake, and do you see what I mean? And they were all kind of similar to Scream. Which Scream obviously has taken elements from Halloween, Friday the 13th, put them together, and we got Scream. So it's like the lack of originality is what. Now, when you look back at their old films, like the old Dark House or the 1930s Universal films, they were so original. Although we had like series like Frankenstein, but that's how it's always been, you know. Like if something's popular, they will make loads of them. But they were great, you know. They were cool because they were original. But now we just get like things that come out, and you think, oh, why have you done that? Like when we had a few years back the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Netflix brought out their own sort of film, which we didn't need, and it brought nothing to it, you know. And I'm just thinking, what? Why are you doing that? You know, some things belong in that era, and that's what makes them uniquely wonderful and awesome. Because I can be spooked out by an old 1930s film more than I can a modern film, because it's come from that era, and you've got that feeling of that era. This is not just American films, this is all films. I mean, I think a lot of countries could be quite guilty of remaking things. Not as much as America, though, that they do make a lot of remakes than a lot of other countries do. You know, we tend to make one. Like, for example, Hammer made Dracula. That was popular, so they made other stories include involving Dracula. So they're not remakes, that's a series. It's a little bit different than making a film like that was popular and then remaking it. Like Pit and the Pendulum, making that now would not be as good as the ones that came back then, you know, because they are of its time, and that's what makes them uniquely brilliant. So that is why America didn't make my top 5. They're probably 6 or 7. Okay, they're fantastic films. You know, they've got the biggest budgets, the biggest sort of like companies out there in America: Paramount, Universal, Warner, Sony, all Lionsgate, all these great companies are making these incredible films, and they are great. And American films like we've had some recent years have been incredible. The Terrifier films, you know, you've got some great directors: Eli Roth, John Carpenter. You know, there's some amazing directors and stuff like that. But it's just, I think post 80s, it kind of got very samey and trends set in following. So like I said, if a film became popular, like now Terrifier, and the gore is popular. So what are we getting now? Gore films, Heart Eyes, Thanksgiving, you know, things like this, and sort of following along the popularity of the Terrifier gore. And I think that's what happens a lot, and that's what happens with like the Scream is popular, so they made loads of not spin-offs but ones that were like it, and I think that's why it loses the heart a little bit. Whereas we get release a film here, and it'd be quite popular, The Ritual for an instance, but we don't make another one like it. We've made that, so other filmmakers will make something else. But then again, you know, America can be the most creative. You look at Robert Eggers, his film The Witch, The Northman, absolutely fantastic. And he's just recently done a reimagining, not necessarily a remake, but a reimagining of Nosferatu, which again was fantastic, really cool. So I'm not knocking American Horror, so please don't think I'm knocking it. I'm not. I just think it just lacks the personality that the other countries have, because you have it in such mass, and here the other countries do it as it's not as much. So that's probably why they're my favourite horrors. Cheers, guys.